Welcome to Books and More. I'm your host, William Cooper, and with me today is Dr. Ross Greene. Ross, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well today. How about yourself?
Doing well, thank you. Very excited to jump into your book, but before we do, let's provide listeners a little bit of context. Maybe you can tell us about your background.
I am a clinical child psychologist, have been since 1989, so I've been around the block. Have been working with kids with behavioral challenges for most of my career. Have written a bunch of other books before this one, including The Explosive Child and Lost at School and Raising Human Beings. I only write new books if I feel like I have something new to say. And I'm the founder of the nonprofit Lives in the Balance, which is now 17 years old and spreads the model that I originated, mostly at no charge.
That's fantastic, and what a worthy subject to dedicate your professional life to. Um, Tell us about the book, and let's start with the title and where folks can find it.
The title is The Kids Who Aren't Okay. The subtitle is The Urgent Case for Reimagining Support, Belonging, and Hope in Schools. It's me reacting to the fact that we are seeing sky high rates of depression and anxiety and suicidality and chronic school absenteeism and concerning behavior in our schools. And I, along with a bunch of other people, are wondering what that's about, and what we can do about it. Um, and the particular focal point of this book, of course, is schools and what they can do about it. Interesting time for schools. They're losing teachers at an astonishing rate. Things are very difficult. And a lot of schools these days, I think that that's because of a lot of the programs that have been imposed on them that have neither worked for educators nor our most vulnerable kids. And I think we need to do something about that.
Um, what what is the socioeconomic breakdown here? And what I mean by that is this, are we seeing the same level, the same type of trends across the board, or is it concentrated more? I mean, for me personally, I'm not an expert in this space, but I am an expert in political science, and I've long been just appalled at the lack of resources that go to underprivileged communities in education. And I know there's lots of problems there. And compare that to affluent neighborhoods, and the story's tragically different, depending on where, the ovarian lottery decides what kind of school you get to go to.
Mm.
But how is that aspect of this in terms of the impact?
Kids of lower socioeconomic status are, as usual, at greater risk for the circumstances that I just described, but we are seeing those circumstances across the socioeconomic spectrum. So this is not just something that's affecting kids of lower socioeconomic status.
And what's the root cause of,
Mm.
let's start with the depression. And what a sad topic. Why are kids more depressed? What's going
Be-
on?
Because it is, and I think this reason is the same for all the things I described. It's harder to be a kid these days. And the truth is, that fact notwithstanding, a lot of kids are still doing okay, but a
Yeah.
lot more are not. And in chapter one of the kids that aren't okay, I describe the myriad changes that have occurred over the last 20 to 30 years that have made it harder to be a kid. And without going through all of them, very high on the list, school shootings, high stakes testing, which is where we decided that it was a good idea for both educators and kids to try to get every kid over the same bar by the end of the school year, which is completely ignoring the developmental variability that's walking in the door. Educators told us when that stuff first came out that it was a bad idea, and 30 years later, it's still a bad idea. Um, Zero tolerance policies, which is where we sort of tighten the vice grip on consequences as a response to Columbine and in an effort to make schools safer. Zero tolerance did not make schools safer, they just made schools more punitive. That has been to the detriment, in particular, of kids with concerning behaviors. Um, there's a long list. There's things that
Where
are specific to girls, there's things that are specific to boys. Being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world isn't so easy. The list is quite long.
two questions. Number one, where is social media in this calculus? And number two, conventional wisdom is that we've gotten more understanding of neurodiversity than we were decades ago. I'd love for you to jump into that topic a little bit in this context. So, two
Thing.
softballs, right?
Yeah.
Easy questions.
Well, social media is in the mix. There's no doubt that there are things in social media that kids are being exposed to way earlier in life. And for a lot of them, way before they have the maturity or the perspective to handle them. No doubt about that. But the most definitive thing that can be said about the effects of social media on kids' mental health is that it is those kids who are way overdoing it whose mental health is being most adversely affected. Most of the rest of the data are correlational, which doesn't mean they're not true. It just means we can't get too carried away with it. And the big thing about getting too carried away with it is if we're only focused on social media, we will miss all the other stuff that is much harder for kids these days while we're so busy being consumed with social media. So it's not that I'm dismissing it, it's just that it is not even close to being the only thing.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, we are better at understanding neurodivergence. That doesn't mean that we are, in a lot of places, any better at dealing with it. So those are two different things, and it depends on what circles you're running in. Um, the neurodivergent community has done a very good job of increasing understanding of what it means to be neurodivergent, um, how important it is for kids who are neurodivergent to be heard, how important it is for us to focus on their skills rather than on trying really hard to make them not look neurodivergent. So that's out there. It's just that sometimes it's slow for things to be picked up. You know, for 35, 40 years now, I've been talking about how kids' concerning behavior is a frustration or distress response. The research is there to back it up. And yet, that is not a universally accepted mentality either. So you keep plugging away. Thankfully, the neurodivergent community isn't going to stop plugging away. It's just that these things tend to take a while.
Yeah. On the neurodivergency question, I all usually when there's a narrative out there that I don't fully understand, I think, oh well, I kind of get what the other side's coming coming to. I usually don't just constantly hear something that makes me think the people who think that are just like really, really, unintelligent in this view. But there's one example here where I do find that where people are always talking about how autism rates and neurodivergency rates are skyrocketing. And it seems so unbelievably obvious to me. And prove me wrong. I hope you do, because I'd love to hear what, some sort of alternative. But it just seems extremely obvious to me that that's because people are looking for it and paying attention to it as the driving factor, as opposed to like the water in the faucet now has germs in it that are making people like it. That just seems incredibly obvious that, yes, if you look for something all the time, you're going to find it more. Uh, what do you think about that?
I think that greater awareness can lead to greater identification. Um, but I'm not a big diagnostic guy anyhow.
Okay.
So that doesn't, um, if I was to translate increased rates of autism, increased rates of ADHD, increased rates of pathological demand avoidance, increased rates of whatever diagnosis, my translation of that is diagnosis or not. We have a lot of kids who are struggling more. Heightened awareness or not, we have a lot of kids who are struggling more. I don't worry so much about the categories. I think the categories are overrated. Um,
And
we have a lot
blurry.
of kids. We have a lot of kids who are doing less well, and we got to do something about it. And I just don't love getting caught up in the identification of diagnosis issue because that too could cause us to miss the forest
It's
for
a
the
it's
trees.
a could be a diversion from what matters more. Yeah. It's more of an intellectual curiosity for me, but you're right. It's not. We just got to help the kids is the bottom line. Um,
The kids are showing whether they meet diagnostic criteria for something or not. See, this is the problem. There are kids who are struggling and people are waiting for a diagnosis before they help them. Why would you wait for a diagnosis to help a kid who's struggling? You already know the kid is struggling.
yeah.
Um, I used to work in an ADHD clinic where my job was to put parents and kids through this whole rigmarole where it spit out ADHD yes or ADHD no, right? I always felt terrible for the parents who got ADHD no because they didn't show up at the clinic because everything was copacetic.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
showed up at the clinic because something was wrong and diagnosis no, ADHD no told them, at least
Yeah.
from that perspective, nothing's wrong. Well, they know something's wrong. Let's
It's a
fix it.
it's a great point. I have a strong aversion to categories, period, in the world, and diagnoses are one example, and they lead to a lot of mistakes. That's a great example of one. Um,
But by the way, the bad news is services, special ed services, funding for those services is still tied
to the diagnosis.
largely to the diagnosis.
Yep. Um, Kids are struggling more. Why are they showing up in schools struggling more? What's going on before they get to the school? And how much of that's nature, how much that's nurture, but what what's happening before they even get to where you're focused on that is leading them when they arrive to be in more trouble than they used to be?
Well, um, everything's 100% nature and 100% nurture. So for me, um, another dichotomy not worth spending a great deal of bandwidth on, because yes, there are kids who have a genetic predisposition to something. And yes, they either will or won't manifest that genetic predisposition based on what happens after they pop out. Um, so I always roll with 100% nature to 100% nurture, which is actually true. Um, I think it actually has more to do with what happens once they show up at school. We've always had kids. We've always had a lot of variability in kids showing up for school in terms of level of preparedness for what school's going to throw at them. Um, my preschool colleagues, the ones that I really think highly of, are very distressed about how we keep raising the bar earlier and earlier, completely ignoring that developmental variability that's walking in the door.
Yeah.
Um, Decent recipe for losing a kid, by the way. Take a kid who, for whatever reason, isn't quite ready to be there and say and raise the bar on them, you're going to lose more kids, right? And it continues on. But the other thing that is very troubling is that we are still in a very behavioral mindset in our schools as it relates to what we're paying attention to and what we're trying to do something about. when a kid is struggling. A lot of kids struggle and communicate that they're struggling through their concerning behavior. What does that mean? Concerning behavior is a frustration response, it's a distress response. What is the predominant intervention that we've been using with those kids forever, but,
Punishment.
cer but certainly since B.F. Skinner? Right, consequences, either a reward or a punishment. This is the most critical part of my work. What we're missing there, concerning behavior is caused when kids are having difficulty meeting certain expectations. That's the root cause of concerning behavior. They're having difficulty meeting a particular expectation. They're having difficulty what we assign them to read. They're having difficulty keeping their hands to themselves when they're standing in line for lunch. Difficulty meeting expectations leads to frustration responses. Um, we've been trying to modify frustration responses through consequences forever. It's made us late a lot. Chapter 3 in the new book is called Set Up to Be Late because a lot of what we're training educators to do is how to handle kids who are at the precipice of or are already frustrated. But when we focus on the expectations they're having difficulty meeting, what I call unsolved problems, these kids become very predictable. The unsolved problems occur before the concerning behavior. So focusing on unsolved problems helps us be early instead of late. Now let's juxtapose that against the kids we were talking about earlier. Kids who may be showing up ill prepared for what school is about to throw at them. If what the school is mostly focused on are the concerning behaviors that the kid exhibits, the unsolved problems will never get solved. We will have a kid who becomes increasingly frustrated. We're going to kick those unsolved problems down the road, just like kicking a can down the road. Um, there's your recipe. If we also tell educators that they got to get every kid over the same bar by the end of the school year, and their job security and job performance is going to be pegged to that, we've just added to the toxic brew called How to Lose a Kid.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. It's a great message. Um, in a world of limited resources, how do you provide the attention necessary to disentangle all of that and address it?
Some schools are doing it already because we work with a lot of schools. Schools are spending a fortune on crisis management strategies. Schools are spending a fortune both on training their teachers to do crisis management. Schools are spending a fortune on the kids who they have to place out in special purpose schools, which are extremely expensive. Um, doing the wrong thing is always more expensive. So it's not that the money isn't being spent, it's what the money is being spent
The
on
the existing resources reallocated would address the problem, you think?
more than you can imagine.
Okay. Um, I want to circle back. Well, I want to ask you about nature versus nurture again because you were
Hmm.
it's an incredible topic, one I think about often, and I don't usually get an expert in that topic to talk to. But before I do, I want to give an open-ended anything more. I know that's your central thesis and the most important part of the new book. So I want to give you a chance to elaborate before I indulge my curiosity.
Um, the only thing I would add to what we've talked about already, and people can read about it in the book because it would take a while to explain, is how to solve problems with kids. But so all I'll say about that is since we're going to be in the problem, so people know how to punish a kid, right? We know how to do that, right? We also know how to keep punishing them when the punishments we've already administered don't get the job done. So we're good at that too, right? How do you solve a problem with a kid? The two biggest ingredients are it's got to be proactive. You don't want to be doing this in the heat of the moment. This is not a crisis management program. Luckily, the vast majority of kids' unsolved problems are old, meaning this isn't the first time Johnny has had difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math. It is the 197th time Johnny has had difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math. Why are we dealing with it in the heat of the moment again? So the problem solving is proactive, not reactive, because unsolved problems are predictable and can be identified proactively. The second ingredient in the problem solving process is that it's collaborative, meaning the full involvement of the kid. The kid is an integral, indispensable member of the problem solving team. Um, Solutions have to be mutually satisfactory, which means they got to be good not only for the adult, but also for the kid. The rest people can read about.
That's great. All right. You said it's 100% nature and 100% nurture. I need you to elaborate. What does that mean?
There is a model in mental health called the diathesis stress model. And it means pretty much what I just said. And that is that, yes, a lot of mental health disorders are highly heritable, meaning that there is a strong genetic component. But that doesn't mean that somebody who is genetically predisposed to a particular condition is going to have that condition. Why is that? Because of nurture. So nature confers the risk. Nurture determines, plus nature determines outcome. It's always the two. Risk is predominantly genetic. One could, though, also make the environment, the argument that risk even has something to do with nature. For example, what a pregnant mother is putting in her body while she's pregnant, how she's being treated while she's pregnant. So those are environmental factors that are affecting a kid in utero. Geez, is that nature or nurture? Now I'm getting confused, right? Much easier to say everything's 100% nature and 100% nurture. I tend toward thinking that says a person's outcome occurs as a function of the degree of fit between themselves and their environment. It's called goodness of fit theory, which started as a statistical theory, but then was applied in psychology. This is straightforward. When there's a good fit between characteristics of the individual and characteristics of the environment, we have compatibility and we would expect an adaptive outcome. When there is a poor fit between characteristics of the individual and characteristics of the environment, we would expect a maladaptive outcome because we have incompatibility. So, no matter what the genetic risk a person has for a particular condition, nurture is always in the mix, always, because it's nature plus nurture that determines outcomes.
I like that a lot. Um, an example where I struggle to fit it into the paradigm would be somebody who's born with Albert Einstein, 180 IQ. And this is just one example of many. Other than extremes, which I'm sure my sense is extremes can blunt and change lots of things, not in every direction. And extreme's not going to make your IQ go from 80 to 180, but it could blunt your cognitive functioning in a big way, for example. But Albert Einstein, other than the extremes, because of what we think of as nature, was going to be pretty darn smart in his life, right? So the predominant factor, I would think, again, other than the extremes, but tell me if I'm wrong, and the extremes certainly would change it. So maybe the middle 60th percent of the bell curve or something like that.
I
He's
think
going
it's
to
the
be a
whole bell.
pretty, what's that?
I think nature and nurture is the whole bell curve.
But
Um,
when he's really smart, if he had 100 different lives, he was going to be really, really smart, and a lot of them because of nature. And so you would say in that case, nature predominated. Is that right, or would you say,
Not the way I look at it.
how do you look at
Um,
that?
he had the potential to have a high IQ based on, I guess, genetics. right?
Yeah.
And I don't know enough about Albert Einstein's life to comment on what he did or didn't go through. But if he had, and I don't know any of this, abusive parents, had a learning disability on top of his high IQ, which can happen, there's any variety of circumstances that could have made his outcome not as ideal as it may have been just because he was smart.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The
So I
big,
don't know if he would have
huge.
had it.
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if he would have had a 180 IQ had he grown up in different circumstances. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm very tied to everything's 100% nature and 100% nurture. I would have to read up on Albert Einstein to see what environmental factors may have enhanced his outcome. But I would not say that his 180 IQ was purely genetic. Almost nothing is purely genetic when it
Yeah.
comes to outcomes.
Yeah. And not to quibble at the margins. I wasn't suggesting he'd have the same IQ, but he'd be a pretty damn bright guy under most circumstances, would be my sense. And maybe a physical example is better. Somebody who's 6'5", 250 pounds, pretty muscular. Most of his life, he's still 6'5". Now, he could be obese, he could be really skinny, but the middle of that bell curve, there's some variation, but he's still a big dude. And you can still say that's mostly nature. So maybe that's a better example. How, if you agree, how would that fit into the 100% nature, 100% nurture paradigm?
Well, would he have been 6'5", 250 if his mother, whatever the genetics, if his mother had smoked and drank heavily during pregnancy?
That would be the extreme. So I'm looking maybe the middle 80%.
You know, well, I'm not completely clear on what you're calling the extremes. I
Yeah,
just know that there are a variety of factors that would influence his outcome besides the fact that he was predisposed to be 6'5", 250. If
yep,
he had been food deprived, there's
absolutely.
if he had a mental health disorder that on top of being 6'5", 250 compromised his ability to eat food. Boy, the list is endless of things that could have turned him in a different direction besides being 6'5", 250. Yeah, genetics got the ball rolling. The rest is nurture. We cannot get rid of the environment and its influence on outcomes.
Absolutely. Agreed. My last point, and then I'll give you the last word on this if you have one, would be as a lay person in this, I certainly agree with that. I would say you never, ever, ever have 100% nature or 100% nurture. It's always a balance between the two, but one can predominate. That would so to say that's 100% one and 100% and they're equal. In some cases, to me as a layperson, it feels like certain outcomes not 100% to zero, but there can be a predominant factor. Um, but I'm a, podcast host and you're a specialist in this
No,
area.
no.
So,
You know, the one of the mental health disorders that has a very high rate of heritability is autism. I've seen people say it's 80 to 90% heritable. That's fine.
yeah,
That does not speak to what the outcome is going to be for a particular kid with outcome. Then it's always going to be about nature and nurture.
yeah,
Could one make the argument that even a kid who is highly predisposed genetically to become autistic might not because of the environment? Yes, that argument could be made. So I tend not to deal with percentages. I tend to deal with, yes, this person is at very high risk for that. Um, Now, nurture is going to kick in. Let's see what happens next.
yep. I like that. Last question before we adjourn. What's next? Do you have another book in the hopper? I know you only write when you have something worth saying, which is fantastic, but do you have anything worth saying?
It's percolating. Um, you know, um, I am feeling the need to write a book. about how diagnostic we are
Ah,
and how that works against us so often. Um,
I love it.
Truth is, we are all developmentally variable, every one of us, right? And yet, talking about bell-shaped curves, we diagnose in the mental health profession based on people whose very human symptoms, whether it's sadness or anxiety or activity level or attention span or inability or difficulty meeting certain expectations, we diagnose based on the extremes. Um, like you, I'm not a big category guy. I'm actually finding that that's not the most helpful way for us to understand kids who are struggling, adults who are struggling, the human species. We're making too much of the extremes. We've been doing that for a very long time. Um, I think we need to look at the commonalities of human beings rather than the extremes so that we're lifting everybody up, diagnosis or not. Um, that's next. It's
I love
percolating.
that. I love that. I will devour that book and invite you to come back on to talk about it because that's a really important topic. And I think this relates to that at a again at a layperson level. When I look around at people I know, I always think we're all on a continuum with all these questions, and the people that just cross a certain threshold get diagnosed. So if you're on the 69th percentile of attention challenges, you don't have a label. But if you're on the 81st percentile, you're ADHD, and but we're all on it. And we're all divergent. I've never met a human being that was not divergent. I know I am, that's for sure. And so um, I don't know if that's relevant to this or that's too
Totally.
good.
No,
Good.
totally. And here's what's interesting. The kid who's at the 81st percentile might not even get services by being at the 81st percentile. That might still be too low. The important point is that the kid at the 69th percentile might be struggling in a big way, but they're even further away from help by
Yeah.
virtue of the fact that we are so percentile and disorder oriented that we're missing what's sitting in front of us, a kid who's struggling. This is a big part of what the kids who aren't okay is about too, because a lot of the ways we've already mentioned this briefly, a lot of the ways special education services are structured in school, very categorical. Um, I think that's to the great disadvantage of both kids and educators. I don't think that's what's best for kids. I don't think that's what's best for educators. I don't think that's the best way to do things. So I'm all about trying to make the processes by which we determine whether a kid needs help far less onerous. We want them to take far less time than they do. A lot of educators complain to me that they spend half their lives documenting so that they can prove that a kid does need help, that anybody in their right mind looking at the kid would agree that the kid needs. Um, this is a broken system. Being punitive in schools is a broken system. I think that, plus a lot of other things, account for why a lot of kids are struggling, especially the most vulnerable. And I think we can do something about it. And I think it's going to save us money. It's just commitment and intentionality. Those are the keys.
Awesome. Well, keep doing the great work on behalf of the all the kids and parents, frankly, everyone, because we're all in this together in pretty direct and concrete ways. Thank you for your really good work and contribution.
Thank you. I can't think of anything else I would do.
Awesome. All right, Dr. Ross Greene, thank you for joining.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me to do this.